You know that feeling when a random thought just pops into your head? Or maybe you have a really vivid dream
Hmm.
and it sticks with you, but you can't quite put your finger on what it means.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like there's this whole other layer to our minds, sort of a hidden landscape, influencing us in ways we don't even realize.
That's a perfect entry point, actually. Today, we're really diving deep into the work of Carl Jung,
Okay.
specifically the opening chapter of his book, Man and His Symbols. It's titled Approaching the Unconscious.
Ah, yes.
And this chapter, it's just foundational for understanding how Jung looked at the inner world and, well, its impact on our lives.
And what's so interesting about Man and His Symbols, it wasn't just written for academics, was it? It
Yeah.
feels like Jung really wanted these ideas to reach, well, everyone.
Absolutely. He definitely felt that understanding the unconscious wasn't just for psychologists. He thought it held vital insights for everybody.
Right?
He believed that by learning the language of the unconscious, and that's primarily the language of symbols we find in dreams,
Mm.
individuals could get a much deeper understanding of themselves and, navigate life with more awareness.
So this book, and especially this first chapter, was like a deliberate attempt to make these pretty big ideas accessible.
That's exactly it. Accessible to the general reader.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive then is to explore Jung's core ideas around symbolic imagery, archetypes, the unconscious itself, all from this key chapter.
Yeah.
We want to give listeners a clear path to understanding these powerful concepts without getting, too bogged down in jargon.
And it's worth mentioning the sheer variety of stuff Jung draws on here.
Yeah.
I mean, he looks at everything from everyday dreams of his patients
Hmm.
to ancient myths, religious symbols, you name it,
Yeah.
across different cultures. So this isn't just abstract theory. It's really rooted in human experience
Right.
across time and geography.
Okay, great. So let's start right at the beginning. Jung really emphasizes symbols. Why do we, as humans, even rely on them so much?
Well, Jung observed that we use symbols to represent ideas that are fundamentally beyond our complete intellectual grasp.
Okay, like what kind of ideas?
Think about really abstract concepts like love or death or spirituality. These things are incredibly complex, multifaceted.
Sure.
No single definition can really capture their essence, can it? So symbols, with their rich evocative nature, let us point towards these deeper meanings to kind of get a sense of something that words alone can't fully convey.
Right?
And religion, as Jung points out, is a prime example. It uses symbolic language and imagery all the time to communicate its core truths.
Right, like a dove for peace or a lion for strength.
Yeah,
They tap into something more than just the literal thing.
exactly.
But Jung goes further, suggesting we also create symbols unconsciously, especially in our dreams. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a really key distinction. So while we consciously pick and use symbols in daily life, the unconscious just generates them spontaneously, which suggests there's this deeper level of our psyche working away, trying to communicate something. And to understand why this unconscious symbol making is so significant, Jung looks at the inherent limits of our conscious awareness.
Limits. But we seem to know so much, don't we? Science, technology.
We do, but Jung argues that even with all our advancements, our perception and understanding of reality are never actually complete.
Okay.
Think about our senses, they have boundaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
We only see certain light, hear certain sounds. And even when our senses do register something, that raw input gets instantly translated into a psychic event inside our minds. What we experience isn't necessarily reality as it is, but our brain's interpretation of it.
So our internal world is always kind of a step removed from the external one.
Precisely. And the fundamental nature of these psychic events, the very essence of our psyche, it remains ultimately unknowable to us. The psyche can't fully grasp itself.
Mm-hmm.
So that means every single experience we have contains countless unknown factors. And then you combine that with the fact that every physical object also has aspects we can never fully grasp, like the ultimate nature of matter.
Right.
And you start to see the inherent boundaries of our conscious understanding.
Okay, so we're constantly bumping up against the edges of what we can consciously perceive and comprehend, which naturally leads to this whole concept of the unconscious, doesn't it? How did psychologists even start exploring this hidden realm?
Well, what's fascinating is that Jung really credits the study of dreams as the initial and probably most accessible way for psychologists to begin investigating these unconscious parts of our minds.
Through dreams.
Yeah, dreams, with their often illogical symbolic nature, seem to offer these glimpses into something beyond our everyday awareness.
But the whole idea of an unconscious mind, it's faced a fair bit of skepticism, hasn't it, from scientists, philosophers?
Oh, indeed. Jung acknowledges that. He points out some argued that the concept of an unconscious implies a kind of divided personality, which they might see as problematic, maybe even a sign of mental illness.
Hmm.
But Jung countered that. He said this kind of dividedness isn't necessarily pathological. He actually proposed it's a normal, fundamental aspect of human psychology.
A normal aspect. That kind of challenges the idea that we're supposed to be perfectly unified selves.
Well, think about it for a moment. How often do we find ourselves acting in ways we don't fully get,
Right.
or having gut reactions that surprise us?
Yeah, happens all the time.
Jung suggests it's not just people with diagnosed mental health issues whose right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. This lack of complete self-awareness, these unconscious motives and actions, they're a common human experience.
So those everyday moments of like, why did I just do that, are linked to this bigger idea of a less unified psyche.
Exactly. Jung touches briefly on some anthropological concepts, like the bush soul in some cultures, where people feel psychically linked to an animal or plant, blurring identity lines,
Right.
or mystical participation, where consciousness boundaries are less defined. Now, these might seem distant, but they illustrate a less integrated sense of self. And he connects this to our own experiences, like dissociation, or being totally overcome by a mood, or acting in ways that feel not like me.
It's almost like we have different parts inside us that aren't always communicating properly.
Precisely. And Jung emphasizes that even in our supposedly advanced civilization, our consciousness isn't this perfectly seamless, continuous thing. It can still fragment, maybe just in more subtle ways than in, say, pre-industrial societies. He even notes that our ability to consciously focus and split our attention, while useful, is different from that spontaneous, unconscious fragmentation that can cause psychological trouble.
Okay, so the unconscious is this real active part of us, and dreams are a primary way to access it. Let's explore that connection more. Why are dreams so crucial for understanding this human capacity for symbolism?
Well, what's particularly insightful here is that Jung saw dreams as the most frequent and really universally accessible source for looking at our ability to create and interpret symbols.
More than anything else.
Yeah. Unlike, say, complex philosophy or intricate religious doctrines, dreams happen nightly for practically everyone.
So they're like a direct personal feed from the unconscious.
That's the essence of his view, yes. And Jung laid out two fundamental principles for working with dreams. First, treat the dream as a fact,
Okay.
something that has its own meaning and coherence. Even if it's not immediately obvious to your conscious mind, don't just dismiss it as random noise.
Right.
Second, recognize that a dream is a highly specific expression of the unconscious, tailored to the individual dreamer's unique situation in psychology.
That makes sense. It's like the unconscious is trying to communicate something vital using this unique symbolic language of dreams. Now, Jung also brings in the concept of complexes. How do they fit into this picture of the unconscious in dreams?
Right. Complexes. Jung described these as emotionally charged clusters. Clusters of thoughts, feelings, memories, often rooted in past experiences that we might have consciously or unconsciously tried to suppress or forget.
Like sensitive spots.
Kind of like little independent psychic entities, yeah.
Yeah.
They can exert a really powerful influence on our conscious thoughts, emotions, behaviors.
And how do we become aware of these complexes hiding out in the unconscious?
Well, initially, exploring complexes was very closely tied to dream analysis and the technique of free association. The idea was you take an image from a dream and then just freely associate whatever comes to mind, thoughts, feelings, memories, and you could eventually trace it back to these underlying emotional themes, these complexes.
But he realized later it wasn't only dreams, right?
Exactly. He found that free association could start with almost anything, a random word, a piece of art, something in the news, and still lead you to the core of a complex.
But dreams still hold a special significance for uncovering these.
Absolutely. While you can start associating from various points, dreams often arise directly from emotional triggers that activate these habitual complexes, those sensitive areas, easily stirred up by events or internal conflicts.
Okay.
So, while a dream isn't the only way to understand complexes, it often gives a very direct and telling route into these emotionally charged, sometimes hidden parts of ourselves.
Now, a topic that often comes up with dream symbols is sexual imagery. Jung uses the example of sexual allegories. What's his take on understanding those kinds of symbols?
Right. Jung acknowledged that, yes, sexual symbols definitely appear in dreams. Things like a key in a lock, a stick, a battering ram. They can often represent the sexual act.
Sure.
However, he strongly warned against a simplistic one-to-one interpretation. Just labeling something sexual isn't enough.
Right, it's not that simple.
No. The crucial task is to dig deeper and understand why the unconscious chose that specific image in that particular dream. Why a key, not a stick? Why a stick, not a ramp? The specific choice holds its own unique, important meaning within the context of the dreamer's life and the dream itself.
So it's definitely not about grabbing a dream dictionary and looking up key means sex.
Precisely not. And Jung even warned that sometimes what looks like a sexual symbol on the surface might actually represent something else entirely. Maybe a desire for connection, a feeling of power, some other non-sexual psychological dynamic. The wider context of the dream and the person's own associations are key.
Let's dig into a specific example Jung gives, the patient who dreamed of the vulgar woman. That sounds like a really jarring image. What was the crucial insight from analyzing that?
Yeah, that dream is striking because on the surface it seemed completely wrong, didn't it? The patient's wife was nothing like the crude woman in his dream, so he initially just dismissed it. But Jung saw something deeper. He introduced the concept of the anima, the feminine aspect within the male unconscious.
The anima.
Okay. Jung often described the anima as embodying less developed or, let's say, inferior aspects of a man's relating, especially with women. Qualities he might be unaware of or unwilling to see in himself.
So this negative image in the dream wasn't actually about his wife at all.
Exactly. Jung interpreted it as the unconscious communicating, very directly and maybe uncomfortably. Hey, in some ways, you are behaving crudely or in a degenerate manner, like this vulgar woman.
Wow, that's blunt.
It is. It wasn't necessarily a moral judgment, but more like a forceful attempt to shock his conscious mind, which probably held an overly positive, one-sided view of himself and bring in some necessary balance.
It's like the unconscious holding up a mirror to parts of ourselves we'd rather not look at.
Precisely. And this brings us to another key idea.
Yeah.
Our inherent resistance to the unconscious. Jung linked this to the primitive concept of misoneism.
Misoneism.
Yeah, basically a deep-seated fear of the new or unknown. He argued that just like early humans might have feared unfamiliar things, we, in our civilized state, also tend to put up psychological defenses. We shield ourselves from surprising or uncomfortable truths, including those coming from our own unconscious via dreams.
That's why we often dismiss or rationalize away dreams that challenge us.
That's a big part of it. We have this natural tendency to push away anything that threatens our established sense of self.
Okay, so we've talked about the unconscious as kind of a storage space for the past, repressed stuff. But Jung saw it as more dynamic than that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jung really emphasized that the unconscious isn't just a passive box of forgotten things. It's an active, dynamic force. And its contents can behave almost as if they have their own consciousness.
That's so.
He gave examples of neurotic behaviors where people seem to act intentionally, but when you ask them, they're either totally unaware of their motives or give explanations that don't really fit their actions. They might hear but not truly listen, see but stay oblivious, know something intellectually but act completely against that knowledge, all because of unconscious influences.
It sounds almost like we have these unconscious scripts running in the background.
In a way, yes. And in more extreme cases like hysteria, this unconscious influence can even show up as physical symptoms like fluctuating pain or sensory issues.
Right.
Jung mentioned cases where people in catatonic states under hypnosis could recall details of events they were consciously unaware of, which shows that even when conscious awareness is severely limited, the unconscious can still be actively registering and processing things.
So these are just bizarre pathological quirks. They're kind of exaggerated versions of things that happen in all of us to some degree.
Precisely. Jung argued neurotic phenomena aren't unique to those with mental illness. They're often just amplified expressions of tendencies present in everyone to a lesser extent. Hysterical symptoms, for example, can be seen in normal folks, but usually so subtly we don't consciously notice them.
This idea of the unconscious being active, influencing our present reality, is really significant. What about the future? Can the unconscious hold possibilities? Maybe even hints of what's coming?
This was a deeply considered aspect for Jung. He observed that just as conscious stuff can sink into the unconscious, new content, thoughts, ideas, even potential future psychic situations can emerge from it.
Really? Like predicting the future?
Not exactly predicting in a magical sense, but more like
Okay.
he used the common experience of having an inkling or a strong feeling that something's up or something's about to happen.
Okay, I know that feeling.
Right. He saw that as the unconscious processing subtle cues, sensing possibilities before they fully surface into conscious awareness. This led him to believe the unconscious isn't just about the past, but also holds the sort of germs of future developments in our lives.
That's a very different perspective than just seeing it as a container for old baggage. Now, Jung also points out that even our most conscious thoughts are sort of tinged with unconscious associations.
Exactly. He explained that the ideas we deal with in waking life aren't as precise and clear-cut as we might think. The closer you look, the hazier their meaning and emotional resonance can become.
Why is that?
Because everything we've ever heard or experienced can, over time, become subliminal, sinking into the unconscious. And even the ideas we consciously hold on to gather these layers of unconscious associations that subtly color them every time we recall them.
So a seemingly simple object or idea can have this whole hidden network of unconscious connections attached.
Precisely. And while these subliminal bits might seem unimportant day to day, they become incredibly significant in dream analysis. They represent the deep, often forgotten roots of our conscious thoughts and feelings.
Oh, yeah.
That's why seemingly ordinary things in a dream, like a closed door or missing a train, can provoke such powerful emotional reactions when we wake up. They're tapping into these complex, unconscious webs of meaning.
And the language of dreams itself is so different from our normal waking thoughts. Jung calls it more pictorial and vivid. Why the difference?
Well, one primary reason, according to Jung, is that in a dream state, concepts can express their full, uncensored, unconscious meaning. They're not constrained by the logical, rational limits of our conscious language.
Right.
In our waking thoughts, we tend to filter and refine ideas, stripping away emotional and associative layers to be as precise and logical as possible. Dreams, though, they just revel in this richer, more symbolic way of expressing things.
He even uses a personal dream about someone trying to jump on his back to illustrate this, doesn't he?
Yes, that's a perfect example. Jung initially couldn't grasp the link between a man misrepresenting his words and this dream image of the man trying to climb onto his back. But then he realized the dream has taken a common Austrian colloquialism. It comes to me often Buckelsteigen, basically. You can climb on my back, meaning I don't care what you say about me, and translated into a vivid physical symbol. It wasn't a deliberate disguise, he argued, but reflected our diminished capacity in waking life to understand this more emotionally charged pictorial language that's natural to the unconscious.
Right. It's like we've lost a kind of intuitive understanding that maybe our ancestors had.
Exactly. Jung contrasted our rational modern minds with what he understood as the primitive mind, which he believed was still keenly tuned into the psychic properties of objects and ideas, giving them a sense of power we often find strange today.
Right.
He discussed concepts like psychic identity or mystical participation, where the lines between the individual and the external world are more fluid. We've largely stripped our modern world of this halo of unconscious associations, and when we encounter it again, especially in dreams, we often dismiss it as irrational or even pathological.
This reminds me of his point about educated people being really disturbed by their own dreams or unexpected fantasies. They immediately worry they're, like, losing their minds.
Precisely. Because we're so used to the seemingly logical, ordered nature of waking reality, anything that can't be easily explained by common sense can feel deeply unsettling. People from more traditional or indigenous cultures facing similar experiences might readily attribute them to spirits or gods, whereas modern individuals often jump to the conclusion of a mental breakdown. Jung pointed out the underlying emotions might be very similar, but how we interpret and label them has changed. Instead of fearing a ghost, someone might develop an irrational fear of cancer, for example.
So the fundamental human experience of encountering the irrational hasn't gone away. It's just framed differently now. Now, Jung draws some interesting comparisons between modern and so-called primitive people to better understand our capacity for symbols. What are some key insights there?
Well, one crucial insight is that many images and associations in our dreams look strikingly similar to primitive myths, rituals, ways of thinking. Freud called these archaic remnants, suggesting they were just leftover bits from our evolutionary past. But Jung proposed a more significant role. He argued they aren't just meaningless leftovers, but are an integral, active part of the unconscious mind. He believed they serve as a vital bridge, connecting our conscious, rational thoughts with the more primal, emotional world of instinct.
So these archaic remnants still hold a kind of power and relevance for us today.
Absolutely. Jung explained that in our increasingly intellectualized, civilized lives, we've stripped many basic ideas of their inherent emotional energy. so they don't resonate deeply on an instinctual level anymore.
Hmm.
Dream language, with its potent symbolism and vivid imagery, often bypasses our rational defenses and forces us to pay attention to these more primal aspects of ourselves. He used that memorable example of the prejudiced woman
All right.
who was immune to logical arguments against her biases. But then she dreamed of being led to a fancy social event, only to find herself in a dirty cowshed.
Huh. That's quite an image.
It is.
Hmm.
The dream delivered a powerful, undeniable message about her own narrow-mindedness in a way no amount of rational talk could.
That really cuts through. It powerfully shows how the unconscious can communicate directly, bypassing our conscious resistance. And this leads to Jung's idea of dreams having a compensatory function, right?
Exactly. Jung proposed that the primary function of dreams is to try and restore our psychological balance. They produce content that compensates for imbalances or one-sidedness in our conscious attitudes and behaviors.
Like how?
For instance, someone with an unrealistically inflated view of themselves might dream of falling from great heights or failing spectacularly. The dream acts as a corrective, compensating for their conscious grandiosity, subtly warning them of potential pitfalls.
And he suggested if we ignore these messages.
Yeah, he suggested that if these compensatory messages from the unconscious are consistently ignored, they might eventually manifest as real-world accidents or setbacks.
He shared some pretty compelling examples of this, like the reckless mountain climber who dreamed of stepping off a summit.
Yes, and the woman who kept dismissing disturbing dreams only to experience a real-life attack. These are powerful illustrations of how dreams can sometimes seem to anticipate future events, not necessarily through supernatural precognition, but because the unconscious mind is often more attuned to subtle cues and accumulating dangers in our environment that our conscious mind might miss.
Mm-hmm.
Many personal crises have long unconscious histories, and our dreams can reflect that underlying trajectory long before it becomes consciously obvious.
But dreams aren't always these helpful guides giving good advice, are they? Jung points out they can also be ambiguous, even disturbing, like the Delphic Oracle.
That's a crucial point to remember. We can't be naive or overly simplistic about dreams. They come from a part of our psyche that isn't governed by purely rational or conventionally good intentions.
Okay.
It's a realm deeply connected to the natural world, covering both beauty and, well, potentially unsettling aspects. Just as civilization brought advancements alongside losses, our connection to this instinctual realm via dreams can be both deeply enlightening and sometimes deeply disturbing.
So the symbols are like messengers.
Essential messengers, yeah.
Yeah.
Bridging the gap between primal instincts and rational intellect, enriching our consciousness by reminding us of the often forgotten language of our deeper selves.
So interpreting dreams is complex, and there are definitely some important cautions to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Jung strongly warned against simplistic, formulaic approaches. He warned against relying on rigid dream dictionaries or applying universal interpretations to symbols.
Right, no one size fits all.
Exactly. Every dream is deeply personal, tied to the dreamer's unique life, psychological state, and the specific dream context. While there are typical motifs, falling, flying, being chased, they must always be understood within the fabric of the individual dream and the dreamer's personal associations, not as fixed codes with set meanings.
Mm.
Recurring dreams, he noted, often point to persistent imbalances in our conscious attitude or stem from unresolved trauma, sometimes even hinting at future developments if the underlying issues aren't addressed.
Jung even shared a significant recurring dream of his own about discovering unknown parts of his house. How did that relate to his later work?
That series of dreams is incredibly revealing. Over several years, he repeatedly dreamed of finding new, often ancient sections of his house. Eventually, it led to a hidden library filled with extraordinary symbolic pictures and old texts.
Wow.
This dream eerily foreshadowed his later deep engagement with alchemy. Shortly after the final dream in this sequence, he got hold of a 16th century alchemical text with illustrations remarkably similar to the imagery in his dreams.
So the dream anticipated it.
That's how he saw it. He interpreted the house as his own personality and conscious world, while the newly discovered, older sections symbolized the emergence of new, deeper layers of his psyche and interests, especially alchemy, which became central to his theories.
That's a powerful illustration of how the unconscious can guide, even seem to anticipate our conscious development. And it really emphasizes his advice: learn all you can about symbolism, but then forget it all and focus on the individual dreamer when analyzing a specific dream.
Precisely. Assuming a dream is purely symbolic leads you down a very different path than assuming it just disguises a known conscious thought. Jung consistently stressed the huge therapeutic value of accurately understanding the unconscious's unique message in a dream, the specific contribution it's trying to make to the dreamer's self-understanding.
He also told a very telling dream he had while working closely with Freud involving exploring different levels of a house. What was the significance of that one in terms of their relationship?
Ah, yes, that dream, where Jung descends through levels of a house from an elegant 18th century room down to a prehistoric cave with ancient remains. It's a powerful symbol of his own intellectual journey and his growing divergence from Freud's framework.
How so?
Each level symbolized different layers of his personal and intellectual history, recent interests, philosophical influences, down to much older, more primal aspects of the psyche. He felt really reluctant to share his deeper associations, especially about the skulls on the lowest level, with Freud. He sensed Freud had a very different lens and would interpret his interest in that material differently, perhaps reductively. Jung even admitted to consciously misrepresenting some associations to avoid what he felt would be an unproductive conflict, a feeling of an unbridgeable gap between them.
So the dream represented him, his reality, versus Freud's theory.
That's how he came to see it. It symbolized Jung himself and his emerging understanding of the psyche, increasingly at odds with Freud's dominant structure.
It really highlights how personal and subjective dream analysis can be, far beyond just applying rules. And Jung eventually abandoning hypnosis for a more interactive therapy also points to this focus on the individual's inner process.
Exactly. He realized dream analysis is essentially a dialectical exchange between two personalities.
Yeah.
If treated as just a technique, the dreamer's unique reality gets overlooked or distorted.
Right.
He believed real healing and growth came from fostering the patient's own inner resources and understanding, not imposing external interpretations. So he prioritized deeply understanding the individual before constructing broad theories about the psyche.
This naturally leads us to Jung's exploration of psychological types, like introversion and extroversion, which are pretty well-known concepts now. How do these different orientations relate to understanding the unconscious and interpreting dreams?
Jung observed that psychology, unlike many sciences, always involves this dynamic interaction between two subjective individuals, analyst and patient. While we aim for objectivity, our own personalities inevitably play a role.
Sure.
He noted people differ significantly in how they direct their psychic energy outwards, extroversion, or inwards, introversion, and also in their preferred ways of perceiving and judging information sensing, intuition, thinking, or feeling. Exactly. These psychological types give a useful framework for general patterns, but Jung emphasized they're a more superficial level compared to the deeper complexities of the unconscious. He also saw people who seemed to underuse parts of their minds, neglecting intellect, or unaware of sensory experience, while others seemed stuck in a static, unimaginative state. He specifically contrasted thinking, intellectual reasoning, with feeling, navigating via emotions, values, intuition.
And it follows that these different types would influence not only how people experience the world, but also how their unconscious shows up in dreams and how they might interpret them.
Absolutely. That compensatory function of dreams, balancing conscious biases, will manifest differently depending on someone's type and conscious tendencies.
Right.
Jung gave more examples. The patient with the big ego dreaming of being a tramp, revealing his patronizing attitude. The woman proud of her psychology knowledge, dreaming positively about someone she disliked, highlighting her own shadow.
The shadow.
Yes. And the outwardly modest man, dreaming of heroic figures like Napoleon, compensating for an inferiority complex, hinting at a secret grandiosity.
It's remarkable how the unconscious seems to have this innate wisdom, always pushing us towards a more balanced state. Now, we often wonder why dreams are so indirect, sometimes nonsensical. Jung mentions Freud's censor idea, but he had a slightly different take on this obfuscation.
He acknowledged Freud's concept of a censor distorting dreams to protect sleep from disturbing wishes. But Jung was a bit skeptical of that as the only explanation.
Why?
He noted that dreams are often full of anxiety and unsettling stuff hardly designed for peaceful sleep. Instead, Jung proposed the indirect symbolic nature, the reliance on analogy and shifting images, is more inherent to how the unconscious works. Unconscious material is more fluid, associative, less bound by linear logic. Dreams, bridging conscious and unconscious, tend to show what Jung called the fringe of consciousness, subtle undercurrents, nascent ideas, rather than fully formed rational thoughts. He suggested dreams can't make definite, logical statements without basically becoming conscious thought and losing their dreamlike quality.
So less deliberate disguise, more the natural language of the unconscious. Now, for the therapeutic use of dream analysis, Jung stressed considering the dreamer's current conscious state, their ego. Why is that context so vital?
Context for Jung is absolutely paramount. He illustrated this by pointing out that interpreting a dream full of, say, personal exaltation images requires a totally different approach depending on whether the dreamer is actually grandiose or is struggling with deep inferiority.
Right, you can't just apply the same meaning.
Exactly. Applying a universal meaning without considering the dreamer's waking reality could be unhelpful, even harmful. Depressing someone already low by pointing out grandiose dream elements would be counterproductive.
Makes sense.
He also shared that compelling example of a long-term patient needing years to build trust before revealing the core of his neurosis. It emphasizes the therapist's need to adapt methods and interpretations to the unique individual and their journey.
This really underscores the personalized nature of Jungian analysis, way beyond standardized techniques. Now, moving beyond just personal associations, Jung also explored collective images and archetypes, especially with intense or recurring dreams. What are these and why are they so significant?
Right. In certain dreams, especially those with strong emotion, universal themes, or recurring patterns across cultures, personal associations often aren't enough for full understanding.
Okay.
This is where Jung built on Freud's observation of non-individual elements, what Freud called archaic remnants. While Freud saw these mainly from childhood and evolutionary history, Jung proposed a more fundamental active role.
Which is
He theorized these images were manifestations of innate, universal patterns of the human mind, the archetypes. He shared compelling examples of highly educated people, even psychiatrists, baffled by dreams with imagery unrelated to their personal lives or culture, often resembling ancient myths, religious symbols, or folklore from distant places.
And the remarkable dreams of that 10-year-old girl Jung described really brought this idea of archetypes into sharp focus, didn't they?
Absolutely. Those dreams, filled with profound philosophical themes.
Yeah.
Good versus evil as a mysterious animal and its transformation, symbolic descents with the reversed morality, imagery like ancient creation myths.
Mhm.
Truly extraordinary for a child. Her father, a psychiatrist, couldn't explain them from her personal life. Jung meticulously analyzed motifs, the divine manifesting in four aspects, a quaternity, the horned serpent, the paradoxical reversal of morals in different realms, themes with striking parallels in diverse traditions across millennia, far beyond the girl's knowledge or typical Christian upbringing.
It's as if these ancient, fundamental patterns of the psyche were spontaneously bubbling up in her unconscious. And the timing near puberty and, tragically, the end of her life was also incredibly significant.
Indeed. Jung noted the unusual, intense focus on destruction, transformation, ultimate restoration, rather than typical themes of starting adult life. He interpreted these powerful dreams as potentially a kind of unconscious preparation for death,
Wow.
expressed through symbolic narrative language like ancient initiation rites or Zen koans, drawing on deep, long-forgotten psychic sources, not just Orthodox Christian doctrine.
This powerfully illustrates the idea of a shared universal layer of the unconscious with these archetypal patterns. Jung suggested we see similar emotional expressions and thought patterns across cultures, even in animals.
Yes, Jung argued basic emotional expressions and cognitive patterns are universally recognizable, even sharing similarities with animal behavior. He even proposed our unique human capacity for reflection might have originated from the painful consequences of intense emotional clashes in early societies, leading to a need to understand and regulate these forces. He also touched on the long-held belief in dreams as prognostication, citing historical accounts like Artemidorus and a modern case of a doctor dreaming his colleague died in a fire, which tragically happened. These hint at the unconscious mind's ability to process info and reach conclusions consciousness hasn't, often guided by these instinctive archetypal trends.
So these archetypes possess a real potent energy, shaping not just individual dreams, but collective narratives, myths, religions.
Precisely. Jung described the specific energy and fascination of archetypes, how they are the building blocks for myths, religions, philosophies that profoundly influence societies. He saw individual complexes as compensations for personal imbalances, while religious myths were like collective psychological therapy for humanity's fundamental anxieties, hunger, war, death.
Right.
The universal hero myth, for example, offers temporary liberation from personal powerlessness through identification. Jung pointed to the Eleusinian mysteries, even the rise of Christianity itself, as powerful examples of archetypal myths' enduring influence.
Returning to the little girl's dreams, Jung saw them not as random, but as meaningful expressions of these profound archetypal patterns. And even her presenting them as a Christmas gift held deeper symbolic meaning for him.
Yes, by consciously offering her dreams as a Christmas gift, she was, perhaps unconsciously, placing them within the symbolic sphere of the Christian mystery of birth and the evergreen tree, a potent symbol rooted in ancient traditions of the dying-born God and the Great Mother archetype. A level of meaning likely far beyond her parents' conscious awareness, despite their participation in the tradition.
Jung also used the example of the Mount Elgon primitives' dawn ritual to illustrate unconscious behavior, how ingrained deeds often come before conscious thought or explanation.
That's a compelling illustration. They performed their ritual with deep conviction, but couldn't articulate a clear, conscious understanding of its meaning. Jung connected this to the broader idea that our actions and beliefs often stem from deep-seated unconscious drives and conscious reflection as a later development. He argued these archetypal powers or gods, though maybe not explicitly named or worshipped now, are still active, influencing our intuitions, emotions, even what we see as bad luck. Modern society's emphasis on willpower, while seeming empowering, often comes at the expense of connection to inner instinctual guidance.
So, our modern gods and demons haven't vanished. They just have new names: restlessness, anxiety, addiction. And this disconnect from instincts contributes to what Jung called the divided soul of modern humanity.
Exactly. Civilized consciousness separated from basic instincts, forcing them to manifest indirectly symptoms, patterns, events. Jung argued true wholeness requires conscious awareness and integration. Someone ruled by moods or unconscious impulses isn't master of their soul.
Right.
He used compartment psychology to describe how we keep contradictory parts of ourselves separate, avoiding inner conflict. The alcoholic cured by Jesus who relapses illustrates this dissociation. Jung even paralleled larger societal divisions like the Iron Curtain as symbolic of collective fragmentation, projecting our shadow onto others.
And this pervasive feeling of helplessness in the West, despite technology, stems from a growing, often unconscious realization that our core problems are moral and psychological, not just external.
Precisely. Jung stressed the critical need for individuals and societies to recognize and integrate their own shadow, the darker aspects for genuine psychic resilience, instead of just blaming opponents. He even analyzed the communist Golden Age myth as an infantile archetype resonating unconsciously in the West's own idealized beliefs about welfare states, peace, equality. He stressed life's reality as an interplay of opposites, the limits of purely suppressing desires or expecting an easy end to complexity.
This loss of connection to instincts and the rise of pure rationality have also profoundly impacted our relationship with traditional religion and the search for meaning, haven't they?
Absolutely. Jung observed millions have lost faith or deep understanding of traditional religion. While unnoticed when things are easy, it becomes acute in suffering, leading to questions about life's meaning. He noted a trend in his practice. More Jews and Protestants seeking psychological counseling than Catholics, suggesting a shift in where people seek cura animorum, care of the soul.
Interesting.
Jung emphasized religious symbols function to provide a framework for meaning, using the Pueblo Indians' connection to Father-Son as an example. He contrasted this with the alienation felt by moderns who've lost such unifying symbols. He also highlighted myth's transformative power via St. Paul, whose life gained profound meaning through the Christ myth.
And these symbolic ideas, so crucial for meaning, often challenge the purely scientific, rational mind.
Yeah.
Why that inherent tension?
Because symbolic ideas, by nature, resist precise logical formulation and objective definition. They're a persistent nuisance to the scientific intellect seeking clarity in data. Jung paralleled this to defining affect or emotion, both subjective, elusive, intertwined with the unconscious. He argued, while academics might downplay emotion or the unconscious, medical psychologists dealing with lived distress confront these irrational forces as undeniable realities. Jung stressed deep understanding of the psyche comes from direct experience, not just textbooks.
This also implies interpreting symbols isn't simple or objective. There's significant subjectivity and nuance.
Immense nuance. Jung cautioned against simplistic, universal interpretations, using examples like male plugs, female sockets, and the Hindu lingam to show context and the interpreter's maturity are crucial.
Right.
He asserted interpreting dreams and symbols requires not just intelligence but growing knowledge of the dreamer, plus significant self-awareness from the interpreter. He highlighted intuition's value alongside intellect, while warning against relying solely on hunches without grounding them in facts and logic. Finally, he acknowledged science's limits and theory's ephemeral nature, reminding us the psyche often operates beyond current scientific understanding.
Finally, Jung made a crucial distinction between natural symbols from the unconscious and cultural symbols consciously developed for eternal truth. How do these differ, and what's their significance?
Natural symbols emerge organically from the unconscious, often individual variations on archetypal themes. Cultural symbols are consciously created, transmitted in religions, myths, traditions to articulate shared beliefs.
Okay.
But Jung stressed cultural symbols retain powerful numinosity, a sacred, emotionally charged quality evoking profound responses, acting almost like ingrained prejudices. He argued they're vital parts of our collective mental makeup, potent forces in society, not easily discarded without loss.
And if they are repressed?
When repressed or denied, their energy doesn't vanish but retreats into the unconscious, often with unpredictable, potentially destructive outcomes, intensifying the shadow. Jung connected this to the dangers of unleashing primal forces seen in recent history. He argued modern rationalism, trying to demystify everything, inadvertently left humanity vulnerable to the psychic underworld by eroding our capacity to respond constructively to numinous symbols. Disintegrating moral spiritual traditions leads to disorientation. He paralleled this to primitive societies losing meaning when their values are undermined by modern civilization, suggesting we might be in a similar state but fail to see our loss.
Hmm.
Jung critiqued spiritual leaders for prioritizing institutions over understanding the living mystery in symbols, argued faith shouldn't preclude thought. Fear of powerful psychic forces leads to ignoring them. He lamented how we've stripped things of mystery, leaving nothing sacred. Contrasted sterile matter with the great mother image, intellect with the father of all, highlighting lost emotional resonance.
So even East versus West systems might have archetypal roots?
He suggested they do, now reduced to abstract concepts. Scientific understanding, while progressing, led to a dehumanized world, isolating us from nature, severing symbolic connections. Dream symbols compensate, bringing up our original nature in a language we find strange. Words once powerful are drained of magic. Jung questioned if our inner world is truly free from primitivity despite the modern surface, pointing to persistent taboos, prejudices, illusions. Concluded modern man is a complex mix of acquired traits and instincts. We must scrutinize his mental products carefully.
So ultimately, Jung concluded that the symbol-producing function of dreams serves a vital purpose: to bring the wisdom and energy of humanity's original, instinctual mind into our advanced consciousness for the first time, facilitating critical self-reflection and integration.
Precisely. As conscious, rational mind developed, it lost direct connection to primal psychic energy, never truly knowing that original mind. So it's crucial in dream interpretation and self-understanding to remember and acknowledge the emotional value in these symbolic messages. Jung emphasized psychology uniquely must account for feeling the vital link between physical events and inner life.
It all comes back to this fundamental split within ourselves: intellect versus instincts, conscious versus unconscious. And Jung believed healing this division, achieving integration, is absolutely essential for individual and collective well-being.
Absolutely. Our intellect created a remarkable world dominated by technology, but this power risks self-destruction if not guided by deeper self-understanding. Despite mastering the external world, we haven't learned to govern our inner world, courting disaster. Traditional guidance sources, religions, belief systems weakened as the sacred retreated into the unconscious. Jung critiqued the illusion that reason alone triumphed over nature, pointing to global issues like overpopulation, political instability as evidence. He asserted change must start individually, each person consciously turning to their unconscious for guidance. Noted limits of existing solutions: Buddhism, Christianity, rationalism for the modern psyche.
Right.
He used the rabbi story bowing low enough to illustrate our disconnect from unconscious wisdom. Criticized dismissing unconscious fantasies, failing to integrate them. Argued we can no longer judge natural psychic phenomena as sense nonsense. Emphasized deep human longings aren't met by material success. Highlighted our neglect of the psyche despite nightly dream signals. Questioned the prejudice against the psyche, suggesting Freud's early work, while groundbreaking, might have inadvertently confirmed existing contempt by framing it as a dump for moral refuse. Jung concluded this view was one-sided. The unconscious is natural, vital, containing all human potential, light and shadow. He believed studying symbolism is a vast, crucial task, with encouraging early results holding potential answers for humankind's current questions.
So the core message we really take away from this incredibly rich, deep dive into Jung's approaching the unconscious is the profound significance of the unconscious mind and its constant communication with us through symbols, particularly in dreams. By learning to pay attention to and understand this often overlooked inner world, we can gain a much deeper, more integrated understanding of ourselves and really our place in the world.
Precisely. And while this initial chapter gives a crucial foundation, it truly is just the beginning of a vast, endlessly fascinating exploration into the depths of the human psyche.
So, for you, our listener, maybe consider this. What might your own dreams, those fleeting intuitive feelings, or even those seemingly random thoughts be trying to tell you? Could there be valuable insights into your own life, your own psyche, that your conscious mind is maybe overlooking or dismissing? We'd invite you to pay closer attention to these inner signals, and perhaps even start your own exploration into Jungian psychology and symbolism.
It really could be transformative.
It could be the beginning of a truly transformative journey of personal discovery, leading to a more complete, more meaningful understanding of who you are. And with that, we can confidently say that this deep dive has thoroughly explored the main ideas, stories, insights, and examples from Carl Jung's foundational chapter, Approaching the Unconscious, focusing especially on symbolic imagery, archetypes, and the dynamic nature of the unconscious mind.